All right, welcome back. This is part 2 of my episode with Chairra, where we're trying to determine what her Enneagram number might be. We might learn it today, we might not. We'll just kind of flush out some things and see what we can for sure say, nope, that's not you, and then some things that might be for thought and consideration to chew on. So how would you experience the limits? And by that I mean if your freedom is kind of limited, how does it feel to you? And right now we're in that, holy smokes, we have limits on us. How does it feel to be limited?
If it's someone else who's limiting it, I have a hard time with that. If it's circumstantial, I can...
Like right now?
Well, like right now, I can handle it. Yeah. And I'm just like, well, this is the way that we're going to have to manage the next little while, and we'll just be okay. If it was a person telling me, absolutely not.
Okay. So more if it's in tune and in line with your beliefs and your values, even if it's in the greater society or world, you can get on board with that.
Yes.
But if it's just someone that you don't know or don't trust and they're putting limitations on you, not cool.
Not cool, no.
I hear that. Would you say you're an optimist or more of a pessimist?
I think that's changed recently. It's, I was...
the yoga teacher training.
Yeah. I was pessimistic and now I'm...
I was assuming you were going to say optimist as I shot that in.
Yeah. Yeah. So
I like all the colors.
Exactly. This is just the universe telling us what we need.
So you would say over the course of your life you were more pessimistic?
I was more pessimistic. I think I've become more optimistic.
And one's not better than the other. They're just different ways, yeah. Would you say that you tend to automatically reframe negative things into positive things?
No.
And then how important is making time for fun and pleasure and pleasant activities?
I would say that I spend more time planning for something, like a trip, but it's not daily. I wouldn't make time daily for something fun or something.
Just more in the future?
In the future, yeah.
Some people like to envision multiple possibilities and others like to get in there and do the work. Where would you be? Would you be sort of in the idea stage or more in the implementation stage?
I would say the implementation, yeah.
You and I should get together. And when it comes to your general frame of mind and the way that you think, do you tend to focus more on the past, present, or the future?
Future.
Okay. So that takes us right through all of the 9 numbers. So before we go any further, I just want, because you know the Enneagram fairly well.
Yeah.
Right? You've done workshops, you've done a teacher training where it was a whole kind of course within a course. You've done reading on it. You could probably eliminate some numbers right away before we even met today, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And would you comfortably be able to do that?
Yes.
There's some numbers that you're like, that ain't me.
9 is definitely not me. 9.
Okay. Any others?
8.
Okay.
5. 3.
And so what are we left with? We're left with 1?
Oh, and 7. I'm definitely not 7.
I feel like you're not the 7.
Yeah.
Okay. So that leaves us with 1, 2, what about 4? How did you feel? That was the one where we were talking about feelings, talking about sadness, talking about
I would say probably
depth of
not
emotions.
4 as well. Okay. There are some characteristics to the 4 that I have, but not, I would say not full out feelings. And
so that leaves us with 1, 2, and 6. And what's interesting, this is really fascinating. So the Enneagram is triadic, and it gets splintered off in 3 different ways, in lots of different ways. So the numbers 1, 2, and 6 all fall within what's called the duty or compliance triad. Okay? And we actually used that word with you because we were talking about image, and were you aware of image? And you said no, but in the way that you would dress a certain way to show up for whatever it is was expected of you.
Out of duty.
Out of duty and compliance, right? So kind of following the rules. But here's something that I'm going to pick up on and I'm going to circle back to, okay? So just based on some of the things that I was writing down, just to recap from our part one, you said you didn't really like being the boss, that justice and fairness was pretty important to you, especially when it came to vulnerable sectors, like kids, seniors, animals, people that, or things that can't kind of help themselves. You also said that it was difficult for you to say no, but when you were comfortable, it wasn't really a problem for you. You weren't really someone that was into huge goal setting. Not that you haven't accomplished things or done things in your life, but goals, you don't wake up with a huge checklist of things to do every single day. Feelings, you could access them, but they didn't really seem like they were the thing that was driving you.
Right.
Would you agree to that? And then when we were circling around the 5, the observer or the participant, you said you could kind of be both, depending on your comfort level.
Yeah.
You didn't really have this huge need for privacy.
No.
It wasn't really important to you. And your information gathering was very selective.
Yeah.
You just kind of were doing things that were of interest to just you and yourself, rather than sort of the broader world. When we were on the type 2, you said it didn't really matter to you to whether or not people liked you. That is a huge hallmark of the future of 2, is to be liked by other people. That's actually what motivates them, because they're worried that if they don't help, that they're not going to be liked. So that's why they continue to help. But you actually very quickly said that that wasn't really a thing for you, and it had been like that for most of your life. I'm going to circle into 6. So I was noticing when I was preparing this that there's 5 questions for each of the 9 numbers, except type 6 has 1 extra question. It actually had 6 questions. So I'm going to dive a little deeper into 6, if that's okay with you.
Absolutely.
Okay. And then we're going to go back and do 1. So the type 6 is, some of the words or the language that's used for type 6 is the loyalist, sometimes the pessimist, sometimes the worst case scenario thinker, or just, I don't always like to give labels to the numbers because we're more than just, a phrase or one word. But those are some of the languaging or words that have been used for the type 6. The 6 lives in the head triad. They use their mental mind, their mental thinking to get things done. You mentioned the word when you were talking about doing projects around the house, that you could analyze and kind of troubleshoot and use the brain to kind of think things through to the end, and that you were actually pretty good and successful at thinking of other ways to do things.
Yeah.
Okay, which I think would be a feature of the brain, regardless of what type you were. So I want to dive a little bit more into what role does fear play in your life, because this is where the Enneagram can get a little bit murky, is when we're asked that question, what can happen is if we are of the self-preservation instinct, so the instincts are self-pres, social instinct, or one-to-one bonding, anybody that has self-preservation as the main instinct will answer that in a way that fear would play a big role in their life. Because when we're taking care of our self-preservation needs, we are managing fear. We're actually managing our survival. So regardless of type, being asked what role does fear play in our lives is going to get answered different ways by different numbers. Now a 6 specifically is mitigating fear through planning and worst case scenario thinking. And so what they're trying to do with the mental mind is to avoid things going wrong, essentially. So could you speak a little bit deeper into what role fear plays in your life, and what kind of things specifically do you maybe feel fearful about, if you can even answer that?
So we spoke a little bit about that I fear for the safety of my loved ones. So if we're out for a bike ride, if we're too close to the edge, or a walk, I'm a little bit worried. I grab my son's hand when my husband goes out for a bike ride on his own down the highway. I get concerned, and I want to know what time I can expect him back at home. People make fun of me because I have his tracking on my phone, not of his phone, and that's because I just want to know where he's at so that I don't have to freak out about where, especially when he's bike riding. So I would say those are fears that I have. I said, like, I don't fear for my own personal safety, but theirs.
Okay. And then, okay, so that's good information. Also, I want to touch back a little bit on your relationship to authority. So sixes will have, will split off. So I think it depends on the Enneagram teacher or the Enneagram school that you're kind of reading about or maybe studying with. It used to be more commonly said that there was two kinds of sixes, regardless of the instinct. There was two types of sixes. There was the phobic six, and then there was the counterphobic six. The phobic six was the one that was more managing fear through planning and wondering where are my loved ones and trying to avoid bad things happening. The counterphobic six was the one that would actually go in towards fear.
Right.
So they might be the ones that would go on that bike ride on a narrow little shoulder and do sort of more high-risk things. They go into the face of fear. And I've come to understand it, and I like this approach to sixes more than sort of the old school way of it, is that it's a continuum for a six. They're not really one or the other, but it depends on the situation, that it's a continuum for them. Just as being a six in general, as opposed to being one type or the other.
Right.
So I like to put it that way, and I feel like a lot of Enneagram teachers are kind of going with that thought more, that it's not counterphobic or phobic, but that a six could be either one of those things at any given time depending on the situation. And so you were saying that for you to have a relationship with authority, it depended on your values, it depended on if you said this a lot, that you knew the person,
Yeah.
if you were comfortable, if you'd been there before, if you'd had experience with that, then you were very willing to go along with authority or to go along with other people.
Yeah.
But quite the opposite if you hadn't yet kind of felt your way through that.
Or there was a lack of trust or anything like that. Yeah. And as you were saying, like, there's two sides, and it could depend, like that pendulum or that.
Yeah.
When you were saying that, it made sense, because a lot of the time we were talking, I said, it depends. I can either be this
Yes.
or this.
Yeah. And so to add to that, would you tend to be even suspicious of authority or people or groups if you didn't sort of have all the information or beliefs and values that aligned there?
I would say that is something I will wonder about people's agendas,
Okay.
or what they're up
What
to,
they really want
what
from
they
you?
really want, especially when we were talking about authenticity and the lack of authenticity. I would say that leads to suspicion for sure.
Okay, that's good information. That's good to know about yourself, because not everybody would say that. Okay. I want to circle back now to the one. But before we do that, now that we've kind of gone through these 9 numbers, we've eliminated a lot of them. And we're kind of going to drill down a little deeper into 1, 2, and 6. Before you came here today, what numbers were you first question, what was the first number that you thought you were at the very beginning of your whole Enneagram journey?
Initially, I thought I was a 2.
Okay.
And then I thought I was a 6, and I thought I was a 6 for the last year.
But more recently, you thought you were
a 1.
a 1. Okay. So let's go back and revisit some of the 1 questions, okay? And I'll try to ask them with a little bit more depth than we did the first time. So the Enneagram 1 is often called the reformer, or they can also be the perfectionist. Oh, the word that I like is the improver. They generally take things that are chaotic or running amok, and they make them better when they're at their best. Ones are the types that are dealing the most with the inner critic. We all have an inner critic, but ones are managing it daily, all the time. Ones are very in tune to justice and unfairness, and they're very in tune to the rules. So 2 episodes ago, we had Riley Maxwell on, and she very well explained that she wants to learn all the rules first herself, so that when she goes to live her life and be in the world, she doesn't screw up and mess up. So ones would take in as much as they can in terms of doing things right. They're very aware of authority, like sixes, but the motivation of the one is a little different. They are looking for, the ones are looking to be right. First with themselves and then to make corrections in the environment. Sixes are more about agendas. They're more about trust. They're more about, ones and sixes can look a lot alike, but sixes are more about the collective. They're more, typically they can have more warmth to them than a one. A one can be quite rigid and sort of black and white, whereas sixes are more warm and encompassing in just how they are with others. So let's ask a couple of more one questions. So do you feel like you have an inner critic?
Yes.
You do? Okay. And is it operating a lot of the time, some of the time?
I would say frequently. But that's again where we went back and forth with is it the inner critic or the inner committee?
Right.
And it seems to be my own voice.
Okay. That's the next question is, can you identify whose voice it is?
Yeah, so it seems to be my own voice.
Okay.
So that's, yeah.
Because Chairra just mentioned what's called an inner committee, and sixes will generally say that because sixes believe that they don't have the answers within them, their own internal compass, their own internal guide. They will go outside of themselves to kind of solicit others. And sometimes there's you can think of like a boardroom of people sitting around a table, and they would ask the president and the vice president and everybody around the table. Or it could even be like, there's your mom on the table of the inner committee, or there's your best friend, or there's your husband, right?
Yeah.
Sixes will often pull, that's why they're so good at being in community. They're very community minded because they care a lot about doing the right thing based on what's best for the group. That's a huge thing for sixes. So you would say that the inner critic's voice is actually your own.
Mm-hmm.
You don't really relate to the inner committee so much.
No, I would say that it's my own voice that's there.
And how harsh is it?
It can be kind of harsh.
Because ones would say that inner critic is ones are really hard on themselves. They're also they can be, when they're not conscious, hard on other people, but they're first doing that to themselves. And then judgmental. You said that you were judgmental of others, but not in a way where you took action with it.
No.
Okay. Typically, not always, but often ones will take action with their criticism. So if someone's breaking the law, I was telling the story the other day about, there's a crosswalk here in Cochrane where it specifically says if you're riding a bike that you have to dismount and get off your bike, press the button first of all that has like the wig-wag lights, and then dismount your bike and get off and push it across. And there was one time where Kyle does not follow the rules at all, and I am aware of them, and I don't like upsetting people either. So if there's no one coming, I'll rip across. But if there's people there, I will follow the rules.
Right.
I'll get off my bike and I'll press the button. And I remember one time Kyle and I were crossing there and we didn't get off our bikes. And a guy rolled down his window and yelled at us and said, "It's people like you that make cyclists so irritating," or something like that. And I died. I was just like, "See, Kyle, like that's why we have to follow the rules." And he's like, "Whatever." But I'm just surmising, I have no idea, but that was a very one thing to do, right? To roll down your window and yell at two cyclists that weren't following the rules. So that's just my little personal example. Whereas a six might think it. They might say it to the person driving, but they might not roll down the window and yell out the window.
I will often find myself in the car down here on like where it's 30.
Yeah.
And people are just driving super fast down the road. I'm like, don't they know it's 30?
So you're aware of that.
Yeah.
And then the need to be right for the one is a really chief feature. There's one right way to do things. And oftentimes they have done a tremendous amount of research on something and they have kind of formulated an opinion around it. Would you touch on that again, your need to be right?
I said that I'm okay not being right.
Yeah.
I'm okay if someone else is right. So I would say, yeah, I don't have to be right.
Would you be more inclined to have group consensus? It's like we're all going to win as opposed to one person is right?
Yeah.
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 Okay.
It wouldn't be about me.
So you're aware of things being done properly, maybe, but not whereas you're the person that is telling others the way that it's going to be done.
Absolutely. Yeah,
Correct.
that definitely would.
Okay.
I would say it describes me.
Okay.
For sure.
Now, you've touched on this quite a few times, even when I wasn't talking about the one, is being perfectionistic. Doing things a certain way, whether it was in your house, imagining in your job, you want things to be done right.
With schoolwork was also, yeah.
Okay. And was that, is there a need to do things right so that you don't let anyone down?
I don't know if it's so I don't let anyone. I think a conversation that often comes up in my house is that expectations of what the expectations my husband has about me and what needs to be done around the house. And he's like, that's not my expectation of you. That's your expectation of you for me. So it might be not letting someone down. And not that I need to be right or do, because you said it doesn't bring me any joy to do those things. I just feel like I should because that's what's expected of me.
Okay. Okay, so I think we've exhausted most of the one. Do you want to touch on to two at all? Do you want to go back into some of the two questions? So twos were the ones that are the helpers. Sometimes called the befriender. They're very friendly people. They're very engaging. They're very attuned to what others need.
I don't know.
And they like to be liked.
Right.
They do things in order to get, actually it's love. That's their way of being getting approval and appreciation. And when they do sort of acts of service for others, if it's not reciprocated and they're given feedback that they're thanked or needed, twos can actually get really upset, hurt, and angry. Does any of that feel homey for you?
I think it a little bit does, yeah. And it's not so much that I need to be, well, maybe it is.
Need to be liked?
Not need to be liked, but need to be, if I do something for someone, I want them to appreciate it.
And is it so that you have that need, that love that fills up your love tank, or is it to know that you're on the right track? That you've done something in congruence with it being done right, or that it's going to keep harmony in the group? So I guess my question is, does it come more from a place of feeling like you're getting love, or does it feel like you're doing it so that you can kind of keep the peace with everybody else?
I would say that it's kind of like it's the right thing to do. It's something that I want to do to make people happy, but I don't think it's not to receive the love.
Okay.
So maybe keeping the peace or the harmony within the group.
And then the twos are the shapeshifters, right? Twos and threes and fours actually will shapeshift because they're all in the image triad. Twos, threes, and fours. And so twos will shapeshift themselves to meet the needs of others. Threes will shapeshift themselves to be what's needed in the room in terms of threes are more the chameleons, right? Where they'll be what you need them to be, but not because they're necessarily serving the needs of others. They're more self-serving. And then fours are shapeshifting so that they look different and unique from everybody else. So twos are the ones that are shapeshifting to try to almost come to the rescue sometimes of other people and their needs. Does that feel like you have that at all in you?
Again, going back to that vulnerable population, it could be, but I wouldn't say that in a general situation that would be the case.
Okay. All right. So where do you feel like, because I don't want to be the person that says, I could certainly give suggestions, do more reading in this area. What was the one thing that I said, think about that? There was one thing that I said, go back and take a look at that. Maybe it'll come back to me. We can actually go back and rewatch the part one, and we'll know where it is. I probably made a note of it somewhere. A couple things that I would say look at is the need to be right is definitely a hallmark of a 1, and the perfectionist part of the 1s is more coming from order and structure and not breaking the rules. And it's interesting because I think 1s aren't necessarily, it's not as if their home is perfect, although it could be, or, they're immaculately dressed, although they can be. Usually 1s pick a few things in their lives that they're really trying to reform or perfect. And other things can actually kind of run in amok. So watch for perfectionism, see where it shows up for you, how important it is, and where is it coming from?
Right.
Is it coming from more of a collective, or is it coming from a place of rules and order? And that might help you kind of discern 1. 6, like I said, that question, that big question about what role does fear play in your life, that might be something to just sit with. So if your husband's about to go on a bike ride, what are you doing as he's preparing to leave the house? Or if your son is going somewhere without you, what are the things that you're doing? Because you used the word planning a couple of times without me asking that. That tips me off just a little bit. That's in the head, right?
Right.
So get curious about fear. Get curious about kind of the source of it. What's prompting it? And you might be really good at kind of keeping things from kind of going all helter-skelter and chaotic, especially in your home life, right? And so I would say to you, when you're in a situation where you've never been before and you are in brand new territory, how do you feel in the body? How are you managing yourself, your environment? Are you trying to think about what's going to happen next? You're shaking your head.
Like that makes total sense to me, because if I have to go somewhere, where am I going to park? How long is it going to take me to get there? How I should probably leave early just in case something happens. And then there's that like rumbling and anxious feeling about how's it going to be once I get there?
And so 6s, 7s, and 5, 6s, and 7s all live in the fear triad, but what they're managing in that triad is anxiety. And they do it in their own 3 different ways. And 7s do it by planning. They mitigate anxiety they keep it at bay by planning. And 6s do it by the troubleshooting, by worst case scenario thinking. So for example, your husband on the bike, there's an app, right, where you can figure out where they are, which I actually think is just a good thing. I know a friend that actually went off the road on a bike and motorists found them. So I actually think that's a good thing to have. But I want to just touch back on, it could be the self-preservation instinct in any number that is describing because I have it too. I have that, where am I going to park? I'm not an early person. I actually don't like being early. But I have parking anxiety, especially if I'm somewhere I've never been. So that could be the self-preservation instinct that's playing out. But if you're a self-preservation 6, I'll actually just talk about the subtypes of 6 a little bit, and maybe we can dive in a little deeper. The self-preservation 6 gets the name of warmth. And they are very friendly. They are generally concerned with the care and just the concern of the group consensus. Everybody kind of wins. They're very loyal. They're very good friends, and they're just cheerful, generally happy people to be around. So that's the self-pres. And then the social 6 is called the what are those guys called? Let's go to sexual. It'll come back to me. These guys are called strength. Sometimes they even get beauty. And typically the sexual 6 is the one that goes against fear more typically. They'll be the ones that might bungee jump, or they even would join, say, war efforts, right? Because they care a lot about the safety and concern of the collective.
Right.
So they would actually go against the fear and put themselves on the front line to kind of help the group and help the world. And then the social 6 is one word. It is, it's not coming to me. I'll have to come back to it. So yeah, those are the 3 6s, which the one that I forget. Any of those feel homey for you?
Well, I said initially that I am asleep to the self-preservation.
It doesn't feel like you.
It doesn't feel like me. And I said, yeah, because I'm the one that gets in the car. There's no water, there's no snacks, there's no nothing.
Yeah.
And it's like, why didn't you bring your own water bottle?
Yeah.
So that one to me doesn't feel, but I've gone back and forth with the sexual or the one-to-one and the social, with the 6 for sure.
Okay, I thought of it. Social is duty. It's called duty, where they're very aware of what's going on for society and wanting to not so much follow rules like the 1, but just go along to get along because it's the right thing to do. They are often, again, like the self-pres one, they can be really approachable and warm people, but a little bit more, they might look a bit more 1-ish, this version here. Yeah, so warmth, duty, and strength are the 3 subtypes for the 6. And so I'm going to give you a little homework. I'm going to give you a little assignment.
Yeah.
So I know we're having COVID right now, and it's hard to kind of get out and do things and put yourself into new situations. But, and you don't even have to pre-think it too much, although you might want to. Put yourself in a situation, or if you find yourself in a situation that is new, that you've never been in before, do an inventory with the body. How am I feeling? You're a yoga teacher, so you know, how's my breath right now?
Mm-hmm.
What am I analyzing? What am I thinking about? Where is my brain going in this moment? So I'll give you a little story that I did this kind of on a big scale, and this absolutely scared the crap out of me because I'm the self-preservation instinct, and I would admit for myself that it's probably, I'm working on it. Social is the one that I need to bring up to balance out the health of my overall number, which is 4, but self-preservation is the driver for me. And so a number of years ago, about 7 years ago, I am also afraid of doing things by myself. And so I decided that I was going to take my kids on a trip to Phoenix. We were going to fly there, and that wasn't the scary part. I could get on the plane. I'm not afraid of flying. I can get myself to the airport, although I'm bad at navigating inside the airport. I was renting a car when I got there. And that was the terrifying piece for me. And it felt somewhat irresponsible going as only one adult with 2 of my 3 kids to a place that I didn't know. And I just stared that right down. I'm like, I'm doing this, and the kids are all, yay, we're in Phoenix, and they're all excited. And as the plane is coming into land and in the airport, I can just feel anxiety coming in my body. What car am I going to have? Where is this car? And now I have to find this hotel, and all of these things are playing out in my mind, just like in full alarm panic mode. And luckily my son was old enough at the time. I think he was about 14 or 15, maybe a little bit younger. I don't think he had his learners yet, but he was in the front seat and he was playing Navigator, and he was awesome. And he was saying, oh mom, you got to go around again because you missed the exit. And I drove everywhere I needed to. But this is an ongoing thing for me. So even though I've faced that and I've done those exercises for myself, I still have that. So I know that my self-preservation just gets really out of control when I'm in a new place, especially when it involves, I'm not afraid to drive.
Right.
I'll drive in a snowstorm even. But it's just if I have never been there before, that I'm going to get lost. It's more that I have, I call it navigational anxiety and parking anxiety.
Yeah.
So you don't have to do that big of a thing. Obviously, we can't fly anywhere right now. But put
I could
yourself...
go to Phoenix.
Yeah, maybe we should go together.
Yeah, let's do it.
And pretend to get lost. But put yourself in little situations to see what comes up for you. And it might just kind of bring out more of your instincts, self-pres, social, or sexual. Or it might bring up more 6 energy or maybe more 1 energy. I don't know.
Yeah.
Any final thoughts here?
I think when you were saying that the social could look similar to 1, that makes some sense to me. That does make some sense to me.
Okay, so that might be something for you to go read on. I just want to recap that this isn't always 100% true, but the teachers that taught me, Beatrice Chestnut and Urano Pius, they suggest that the self-preservation instinct is an unresolved issue with the mother figure growing up, because the Enneagram works with a childhood wound. The social instinct is some sort of unresolved issue with the father figure growing up. And the sexual instinct is a triangulation between both mother and father figure growing up. So that's just, that gave me a little bit of information when working with this material. So if that helps at all. And then you might be able to plug sometimes when we come across the subtypes, if we're not sure of the overall type, the subtypes helps us to dig deeper down into a little bit more of a zoomed out lens of what we're looking at with the overall energy of the number. Yeah. So you might want to look at the 3 subtypes of the 1, which is worry, rigidity, and zeal, and warmth, duty, and strength for the 6th. So any final parting thoughts?
No, this is great. Thank you so much
for
having me.
Clearer?
It tells me I was on the right track, right? So based on all of the reading and trying on that I've been doing with the different numbers, and it does point me that I'm on the right track, that the work I've been doing is making sense.
Okay. So there's 2 numbers that take a long time to find their number, and they are 9s, because 9s have the ability to know what it feels like to be all the numbers, and so they have a hard time narrowing down just 1, and 6s. And oftentimes why 6s can struggle finding their number is because they're skeptical of the Enneagram itself. They want more information about it. They're skeptical and almost cynical of where did this come from and who said so, and that doesn't quite. I'm not getting that.
But I would get the more research. And I think the other part is I've had some friends who were like, "Yep, I'm a 6,"
and they just knew.
And I said, "Well, if they just knew, then how can I don't know?" And so, well, maybe it's something else. And then the childhood wound for 6 just didn't really sit with me. It didn't make sense.
Yeah, the childhood wound for 6s is there was some instability somewhere in their background which gave them the need for security.
Yeah.
They were constantly, as adults or later on in life, looking for, I always call it that 6s are looking for more contingency. They just need more information. They need to know the fullness of something before they can make a decision. They would need to know the truth about something before they can align with it themselves.
Right.
And that came from there being instability in the little 6's upbringing.
Yeah.
And 1's childhood wound would be more chaos in terms of they grew up quickly, like 8s, and they had to take on adult roles and responsibilities really early on in life. And they became about, okay, well, if I don't know who's in charge here, I'm in charge. And I'm going to be the one to tell everybody else what to do, because it's difficult for the little growing up 1 to identify who's in charge, because the authority may have been kind of in and out or unclear when they were growing up.
Actually, now that I think about it, the 6 does make sense, because my brother was born with an illness, and my parents were in and out of the hospital all the time.
Is he younger than you?
He's 2 years younger than me. And so I was at different grandparents' houses. My parents were around. And I didn't really think about that until we were just talking. I was like, oh, I didn't have instability. Like my parents were there all the time. We moved when I was 10, so that was fine.
And the childhood wound is tricky. I was just listening to a book this week. It's a new Enneagram book called The Enneagram of Belonging by Chris Hewerts. I think I'm saying his last name right. And I love the way he talks about the childhood wound, because if you have a fairly decent relationship with your parents, he even goes on to say that the word wound is like, it makes us sound like our parents did something really traumatizing and damaging to us. And for some kids, that is the case.
Right. Yeah.
For some kids, and I think people that can identify their Enneagram number really quickly through the childhood wound it's like they know what happened to them in their childhood. But for those of us that grew up with like parents that were just doing the best they could with good intentions, it can be a little bit more gray. And so he calls it I believe he calls it the childhood misunderstanding, where there's something in the environment of all of us that, and it could be real. It could be something that actually happened that other people could say, yep, that happened. Or it could be something that was perceived by the child. So it wasn't that the parents set out to make their kid's environment unstable or insecure, but through the events of whatever was going on with other siblings, with moving, like you said, could just be what you perceived your environment to be, that you then created and developed a personality around it. So I love the way that he describes that, and that fits for me as growing up too. And it can be hard to find your Enneagram number, like saying, oh yeah, that horrible thing happened to me when I was 5 or 10. And so I think that makes it more challenging for us to find our numbers when we actually had pretty decent upbringings, you know.
And it's almost like a betrayal of your parents.
He
when you
says
go, well,
that
this is
too.
right.
Yeah. And us as parents, we're both parents, you know, we like, oh my gosh, what are we doing to wound our children?
I have started like looking at that with my son. I'm like, oh, I probably shouldn't do that, because, and again, that's the planning and the worst case scenario, right? Is I probably shouldn't do that. Maybe that'll turn his childhood wound and he'll.
So it's more a misunderstanding or an interpretation of environment through that child lens, right? And none of us escape it. We all end up with some fixation, with some passion or vice. So will you check back in with me after you dig around a little bit more and see what you come up with? Because I'd love to be able to share with people, you know, maybe in a few months or so and see where you're at.
Yeah, I think that'll be great. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I do appreciate you coming on, especially you mentioned at the very beginning that you were nervous, and a few years ago you wouldn't even have done this. So thank you so much. Your sharing your story is only going to help other people investigate and learn their own. So thank you again.